4 years on, has Brexit been a success?
With between 85 and 80% of young voters, that's people under the age of 25, saying they want to rejoin, it's not looking like a success. Has Brexit been a success? This is what these four are going to debate about. We have a Labour MP, Ben Bradshaw, a Conservative MP, a Deputy Chair no less, Rachel McLean, and Kate Andrews, a Libertarian American who works for The Spectator. Ollie from Politics Joe, and I am a fan of the show, although we'll debate some of the points that Ollie brings up in a minute. So, let's get back to the question.
4 years on, has Brexit been a success?
Watch the clip run on the BBC show and see how many of these Brexit promises have come true.
The most important thing to say tonight is that this is not an end, but a beginning. This is the moment when the dawn breaks and the curtain goes up on a new act in our great national drama. And yes, it's partly about using these new powers, this recaptured sovereignty, to deliver the changes people voted for, whether that is by controlling immigration or creating free ports or liberating our fishing industry or doing free trade deals or simply making our laws and rules for the benefit of the people of this country.
In total, I saw 5 promises, and out of those 5, I don't think the government or Boris ever delivered on any of those for Brexit. Immigration has skyrocketed up to 750,000 in the year 2023. And in part, it's down to the fact we've got such a low birth rate, and now the government are demanding that we have more people born, but it doesn't resolve the problem immediately, only immigration does.
The Times revealed earlier this week that only half of Generation Z and millennials plan to start families. This is a real crisis, and not one that is invented, but people aren't fretting about it as much as climate change. The UK birth rate sits at 1.56 per woman. This is significantly below the replacement rate of 2.1, which would keep the population at a stable level.
Or creating free ports.
Free ports are essentially territories inside the UK that can have their own rules and regulations.
Freeport Corporation, building superior cities.
In 1922, the Freeport Corporation founded its first city. Now, 100 years later, we remain at the forefront of a free way of doing business. Free from trade unions, free from environmental standards, with a board and governor selected by business for business, with zero government interference. We set the judiciary and have our own security. And, with the full support of the UK Conservative Party, we pay less tax to the NHS, meaning more profit for you. At the Freeport Corporation, we see beyond democracy.
Freeport Corporation, building superior cities.
Now, that might feel like an embellishment, but have a look at this. Gove, Michael Gove, an MP, a Tory MP in the government, refuses to set a deadline to investigate Tees Freeport corruption. What a surprise, they're protected. And it looks like they've been selling land at a very discounted rate to friends, without anyone keeping an eye on them.
Or liberating our fishing industry or doing...
The fishing industry has hit near rock bottom as a result of Brexit. Have a listen to this issue that came up from this fisherman based in Grimsby.
None of this fish that's on the fish market has been landed by vessel. It's all come overland, and all of this fish that you see on the market today, all of this here is Icelandic. So this is an auction house mainly for Icelandic fish.
5, 10, 15.
Cod and haddock migrated to colder waters off Iceland, Greenland, and Norway. That's where British trawlers fished when Britain was part of the EU Common Fisheries Policy. Boris Johnson promised to negotiate better terms. But the UK government failed to strike deals with these countries, and fishermen are now facing financial ruin.
Free trade deals.
You mean like negotiating with Norway for a free trade deal to be able to access their fishing waters for cod and haddock that we used to be able to access but can no longer? Have a listen to this.
They're negotiating with Norway about reciprocal arrangements, and they're not getting them. They're negotiating with Iceland about access to waters, and they can't go in it. And the whole thing has become a complete mess. So all of the people that thought about leaving and it would all be rosy, it hasn't happened.
Or simply making our laws and rules for the benefit of the people of this country.
Unless, of course, you decide to protest about the monarchy.
So, excuse me.
I'm not here to interview. Okay, thank you.
Why are these people being arrested for protesting in a democracy?
The police even getting heavy-handed with safety volunteers being arrested ahead of the coronation because they were giving out rape alarms, which the police assumed were going to be used to throw at the monarch.
Has it been a success? on those metrics?
Yes, of course it has. Many of those things have all been brought in. It's not surprising to hear sort of Ben kind of like,
Yes.
criticising and trying to interject, because obviously Labour always stood in the way of the popular will of the British people.
An awful argument in a democratic process and regularly put out by Brexiteers. Once we've made a decision, you can't change your mind. Have a listen to Ian Hislop so eloquently put this down.
Again, I can see the reaction in a couple of the rows there, sort of whinging metropolitan losers, can't bear it. After an election or a referendum, even if you lose the vote, you are entitled to go on making the argument. When a government in this country wins an election, the opposition does not just say, oh, that's absolutely right, I've got nothing to say for 5 years.
We have implemented Brexit. Look, I've only got like 2 seconds. I would need several hours
I'll give you more than 2 seconds. All right, name me one. Name me one of the successes.
Trade deals.
So I pointed out earlier that Norway and Iceland will not negotiate with us for fishing rights. But did you also know that the Japan trade deal, 2 assessments made, one for when we were in the EU and one when we left? Have a listen to this.
Let's compare those figures to her department's assessment for the long-term impact of the EU-Japan deal. Under that assessment, the forecast increase in UK exports to Japan was not £2.6 billion, but £4.3 billion.
That means the UK has lost $1.7 billion in trade with Japan.
And the forecast increase in UK GDP was not £1.5 billion, but £2.6 billion. Now, I don't know about you, Madam Deputy Speaker, but that doesn't sound to me like further and faster or above and beyond or additional or higher to me. It sounds like smaller, slower, lower, lamer.
Here's a Brexiteer from a union explaining why it's better to be in a big group than a small group.
I was a union rep, and I know as a group of, if you go in and command something or try and get something, then as a group you get listened to. As an individual, you don't get listened to. It's like if you go do a deal with another country to buy their gas, or as a group, you've got bargaining rights. You've got collective bargaining rights. As one person going in and saying, I want to buy your gas, they'll go, well, I'm sorry, you'll pay our price.
Removal of tampon tax.
Except Ireland did the same and abolished its tampon tax, and they're in the EU.
All right. Sovereignty, you can't put a price on executing the will of the British people.
Now, to avoid repeating myself, Ollie's going to bring this up in a bit, and I'll comment then.
Respecting their will, we saw how shocking it was when the elites and Parliament tried to overturn the will of the people expressed at the ballot box.
All right, well, Kate, Spectator supported Brexit. Have we made the most of it?
Certainly not, but the opportunity is there. And I think that's what Boris Johnson's speech back in 2020 really did highlight, that this is something that can go very well. It can be a success if politicians have the will to do it. The UK left the European Union. 8 weeks later, we were in lockdown. We had 2 years of a pandemic. I would argue there hasn't been a lot of time. By the way, that's not an excuse.
That sounds like an excuse. Remember this.
The benefits of leaving the European Union, including cheaper food, clothing and footwear, which we will get when we are free to set our own economic policies. We can prosper on that basis. We would set our own tariffs. We could have cheaper food, clothing and footwear straight away.
There are a few things that jump to mind. I know that the UK could have gone its own way on its vaccine rollout and procurement. I don't think it would have, given what we actually saw happen in the Eurozone around that.
Although Hungary did, and so did Slovakia, and they're in the EU.
I'm not sure the UK would have been as bold on Ukraine.
Now I'm going to say something somewhat controversial. I don't think this clown would have been so bold as to go and invade the Ukraine if the EU had stayed together and Brexit had failed. Isn't it funny how he waited to invade as soon as Brexit was done and COVID was done? Next up, we have Ollie.
I guess it depends against the metric we measure it. If we go back to the campaign and we say, is it to take control of our money, our borders and our laws? Certainly on the laws case, yes, absolutely. I'd say that we have sovereignty now here in the UK.
Not if you're Scotland, not if you're Northern Ireland, not if you're Gibraltar, all three of which voted against Brexit and were ignored, and not if you're Anguilla, who didn't get a vote at all but have been directly impacted by Brexit. Then they brought up the economy.
In terms of our money, I think most people, politicians, economists and the general public would bite your hand off for the 4% of GDP that we're forecast to have if we'd have stayed in the EU right now.
He says Londoners being nearly £3,500 worse off, 290,000 fewer jobs in London in 2023, and the London economy being £30 billion smaller than it would have been. Is he right?
Yeah, London's been particularly badly affected, but so has the fishing industry and so has the farming industry, all those industries that were supposed to be benefiting from Brexit, and that's part of the 4% that Ola's just referred to that's gone off our GDP as a result of Brexit.
That report, which I think says that we're going to be 300 billion worse off by 2035, has been torn apart by Remain economists as well as those who supported Leave. The New Statesman did a very nice write-up on this. The assumptions made behind those figures are not assumptions that anybody else would put on this.
But the OBR and the Bank of England have been quite clear about how
on a different scale. Assume that the UK would be getting growth that's better than the Eurozone, that's better than the USA by a long way. Nobody thinks that's true.
So let's break that down. The depreciation of the pound is never recovered after Brexit, which means all your imports are going to cost you more money, not cheaper food, clothing and anything else. Instead, food costs have gone up per household by about £210. This has not been helped by inflation, but as you can see, it's higher in the UK than it is in the EU. Let's compare it to the Eurozone. The UK's GDP has been quite similar to that of the Eurozone, but the Eurozone is higher. And the reason is that the UK has declined in trade openness, and that's in part because of the bureaucracy created, as you heard in the fishing video earlier. 90% of small to medium-sized businesses are struggling with the challenges created by Brexit. And this is all down to the fact this is pushing prices up for importers, and therefore they can't cope, and it's causing businesses to close. And because these businesses are failing, it doesn't make the UK look like it's a place to invest in. And it's not just that. 75% of farmers are saying Brexit has had a negative effect on their business. But of course, we're wrong. Kate's right. It's not going to be that big a deal. You only have to look around town centres to see the actual destruction that's taken place since Brexit. It's not buoyed the economy, it's pulled it down. And we're not done because we've got new border checks coming in this year.
Given the conditions of the pandemic, of course.
Are you disappointed by the fact that the Labour leader, Keir Starmer, doesn't think rejoining the single market, the EU single market, would boost economic growth?
No, because it's not a political reality. I think what Labour needs to do...
He actually says it wouldn't boost our economic growth.
I think it's not a political reality, so there's no point going there before an election. What I hope Labour will do, if we win the election, is to remove some of the unnecessary barriers that Johnson's disastrous Brexit deal has put in the way of trade with our biggest trading partner.
Except pollsters are saying it is a vote winner, so why aren't you going for it? It could be for other reasons, but it still comes back to that thing. Are they lying in order to win the vote and get through so they can then start passing legislation to get us back into the EU? So this leads us back into the question...
4 years on, has Brexit been a success?
Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Once again, thanks for listening, and thank you to all of my supporters. You are awesome and you keep this channel going and growing. For everyone else, Happy New Year, welcome back to the channel, and I'll see you next time.